Go.
All right. Well, it's, I keep saying, welcome everyone. I cannot see you, but I am presuming that you are there. And I am Anne Gray. I'll be our moderator. And I have the great luck to sit here in the company of people who know a lot more about this topic than I do, but have helped get me involved in this whole world. So, so that's awesome. So I'm gonna start off by asking each of you to introduce yourselves and maybe list some of the fanzines that you've been involved with, or that, yeah, that you've been involved with somehow. So Chris, why don't we start off with you?
Hi, I'm Chris Barkley. I'm a senior Black correspondent for File770.com. I've written for Mike Lyer at File770 for a couple of decades. I also had the privilege of being published in the late Bill Bauer's Outworlds and Guy Lillian III's Challenger fanzine. I've been in fandom since, well, let's not discuss that. I've been to over 200 conventions and 29 World Cons. So I've been around the block a few times.
I really appreciate that Guy continues to send me Challenger, even though I don't think I've contributed anything to it for at least a decade.
He's still hoping.
Okay, Joel.
Hi, my name is Joel Zockham. I'm a fake fanzine fan. I was guest of honor at the 4th Corflu, which is the convention for fanzine fans, but that was because they drew my name out of a hat. The only general fanzine I published was when I was 16 or 17 years old, with the unfortunate title of Advocates of the Infinite. And please do not try to find a copy. It's pretty much junk. But since then, I've written for, like Chris, for Outworlds, for File 770. I think I was in 1 or 2 issues of Journey Planet. I was in other Chris Garcia fanzines, and I've been a member of several APAs, which I don't know if we're going to get into APAs in this discussion.
Well, at least explain the acronym.
APA is Amateur Press Association. It's sort of where people do mostly personal fanzines and send it to a central person who then distributes it only to the members of the group. I'm currently in one called Flap with a bunch of other old farts.
So it's somewhere between a writer's group and a book club, and yet not.
It's sort of an invitational sort of fanzine that's only distributed to the people who write for it.
Awesome. Okay, Stephen, what do you want to tell us?
Okay, I'm Stephen Silver from about the year 2000 to 2014. I published the fanzine Argentus, which got nominated for the Hugo Award 3 times and won one other award that was put out by an online website. That was interesting since it was also the only fanzine that was nominated for that award that year. So I had a pretty strong feeling I was going to win. I've also edited some issues of Journey Planet, most recently one that was published about 20 minutes ago.
Really?
And the link to that, yes, and the link to that is in Discord. Chris somehow managed to get it up online.
Wow.
And I have 2 additional Hugo nominations as a fan editor for Journey Planet.
Was that the like instant one about the policing issues, or?
No, I'm not doing the policing one. That's being done by Aaron Underwood. Mine, this year's Journey Planet was the most magical place you visited, the place that you go to that makes you feel that there's a sense of magic in the world, that ghosts might exist, or that there's something magical about it, or that you have an instant tie-in to the place. Last year, the issue that I edited that was nominated for the Hugo put me on the team that was nominated for the Hugo was released on July 20th, and it was about people's memories of the Apollo 11 moon landing. So
very cool.
I've also written for File 770. I've written for numerous other fanzines. I also published my own, in addition to Argentus, I did a fanzine called Plata and a very short-lived one called Ides, which my plan was to publish it monthly on the Ides of each month, and it did not last very long because that's just a little bit too ambitious for me. Argentus was mostly a once-a-year thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I forgot to mention, I think I was published in at least one issue of Argentus.
I think you were also.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot to mention I was the fan guest of honor at last year's WindyCon.
Oh.
And I will be the fan guest of honor at Astronomicon next October.
Very nice. I've only ever been the fan guest of honor at ApolloCon. One year after helping out the chair of ApolloCon at World Fantasy. Where
so
she
it was a nepotism deal.
I wasn't expecting it at all, but
well, neither was I.
Well, I would also like to point out that Chris did publish an article in Argentus on the BDP split at 15, a retrospective.
Oh, I did.
And yes, you did.
Oh.
And published an article in Argentus on her trip through Corfu. And Joel published part of the mock section of Argentus, Reimagined Television Shows Prospectus, WKRP in Cincinnati Station, which was reimagining WKRP as a science fiction series.
Nice. Yeah, the trip through Corfu was actually supposed to be, just one section of our Taft trip report. And I think that's one of two sections that have actually been published. So
it is one section of your Taft trip report.
Yeah, it is. There's like 7 left to go. So, but
No rush.
Yeah. I still have this huge envelope of all the records, the journals that we took and all the pamphlets we collected, and we'll get there.
Yeah, I guess I saw on Facebook, and I forget who, but someone published theirs from the 80s recently. So you've got time.
Yeah.
I did see that. Well, traditionally, fan fund issues are published several decades later.
Reports, yeah. Yeah, if anybody's listening and you don't really know what the fan funds are, they're like crowd-funded trips where, starting from back in the day when people might have only met each other on the pages of fanzines, for example, this was an opportunity for people from one continent to say, hey, we've really enjoyed all of your letters. Why don't you come visit? And we've enjoyed your articles or whatever. And then so TAF, for instance, is the Transatlantic Fan Fund. So one year it goes west and the next year it goes east. GUF is the Going Under Fan Fund. One year it goes one south and next year it goes north. And same for the Down Under Fan Fund. So those are they're both to Australia, I think, but one is...
Right, yeah. GUF is from Europe to Australia, to Oceania, and DUF is from the North America. You also have the CUF, the Canadian Fan Fund that goes east, west, and Canada. So I know that Chris, you ran for TAF and lost. Anne ran for TAF and won. I ran for DUF and lost. Joel, have you ever ran for?
I ran for DUF and lost.
Okay.
I ran for TAF and DUF and lost.
Okay. So I need to run
you were
things.
You were part of the year that everybody running was named Chris, right?
Yes.
Oh, that must have been confusing.
So
well, I'm trying to establish a new fan fund. I don't know if I've told you guys, but it's called LAF, the Latin American Fan Fund.
Ah.
But so far we've got about $500 in the coffers from Reno, from our auction and from renovation. And I've got a small board, but I also had a small child. So we haven't made much progress on it, partly because I ran into the realization that it's actually because of international alliances and restrictions on travel for people who are not part of those alliances. It's a much longer time frame if you want to make sure that someone that you elect is actually able to travel to the country that they're hoping to travel to, the idea was that it would take somebody from Latin America to Worldcon, wherever
Worldcon was. I
Yeah.
like that.
A great idea.
Right.
I should point
all
out
the
that
fan funds are worth supporting. I haven't run, but I've auctioned at the fan fund auctions at several of the recent live World Cons.
Speaking
most
of which,
recently San Jose.
Speaking of which, there is a current fan fund auction going on Facebook. I don't have the link, and for some reason, I'm not able to call up that web browser right now. And I don't know if you can find the link. I know that
if you go to the NASFiC page, the event is posted by the page, so you can see it in the events list.
So I know that I've put up something for the auction there, a chapbook and manuscript. I know that there are a lot of pieces of art and some crafts up there. I know that I saw some Tuckerizations. So you can go, you can buy a book, you can buy some art, you can buy your name into a book, and the money that you spend will wind up going to support one of the fan funds to help fans connect with each other once we're allowed to travel again.
Yeah, there's one fan fund I think everyone should avoid. That's the Mid-Atlantic Fan Fund. Since I've been involved with the business meeting, I've been nominated several times.
I always support that.
The middle of the Atlantic. Yeah.
I decline.
Chris, every time you're up for that, I vote for you.
Thank you. Noted and logged.
So yeah, I mean, we did mention it's related to the fanzines topic that when Brian and I did go to Europe, to England, and we also went to Scotland for our TAF trip, it just so happened that Corflu, which is another traveling convention, was over there as well. It wasn't in London, it was south of there. And so we were able to take basically a 10-day trip, and we started it with Corflu, and then we ended it with EasterCon.
Well, TAF, if you want to get historic, TAF started because of fanzines, because it started with the Walt Willis Fund, which was to bring Walt Willis to a Chicago Worldcon, I believe. Yes. And Walt Willis was probably one of the best fan writers ever, and he co-wrote The Enchanted Duplicator, which is a short story about fanzines and fandom, which a Dan Steffen cover is behind me right now.
I'm interested in finding out when Corflu started. Does anyone know?
You have two different ones. You have Corflu and you have Ditto.
Yeah.
Corflu is older, and next year is Corflu 38.
Yeah. And like I said, I was guest of honor at Corflu 4 in not quite Cincinnati.
That would have been in 87.
In 87 in Covington.
So which at least one of them gives out awards?
The fan awards usually are done at Corflu. Right. Ditto has been on hiatus for probably about 10 years or more.
Yeah, Ditto has moved around, and it tends to be smaller.
And the fan awards anyone can nominate for, right?
Well, those fan awards, right, but it's pretty much the people who are in attendance at the convention.
Yeah, but you can vote mail too. And it's fan with 2 A's, FAAN.
So I think Joel's reference to the Enchanted Duplicator cover is a great segue to the topic of fan art. So does anybody want to help talk about what fan art is, how it's distinguished from other types of art, and how it comes about, why it's any of that? Why do we honor it with a Hugo Award?
Well, I mean, we honor it with a Hugo Award because it is one of the areas that comes straight out of fandom, just like fan writing. You know, they are what helped give birth to our culture. Fanzines started out back in the early days of science fiction when Hugo Gernsback was editing Amazing Stories. And one of the things that he did was he had a letter column and he printed people's addresses in the letter column. If you wrote in a letter and he published it, your address would be printed in the magazine. And that helped build a community of fans because suddenly Steven Silver, who doesn't know any other fans and is living in Chicago, sees Chris Barkley's name and says, hey, here's a guy in Cincinnati. I can write to him and ask him what he thought about these stories that appeared in the magazine and, you know, whatever. And so that's how, you know, Fanish Communication got started. And that grew into fanzines because, you know, Joel could say, you know, I'm going to write up what I think and what I'm doing and my thoughts about all this. And instead of sending a letter to Stephen and a letter to Chris, I'm going to duplicate it on my enchanted duplicator, and I'm going to send it to. Yeah, well, it wasn't necessarily a mimeograph in the early days. I mean, it was a Gestetner.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You know, and you know, he's going to print off copies, and he's going to take all the addresses that appeared in Amazing Stories over the last year and send out copies to everybody, and hopefully get things back, whether letters of comment or their own version of a fanzine once it can be done. Of course, the earliest fanzines were done by clubs. The first one that we usually consider is one called The Comet. And, you know, it's one thing to look at just pages of texts and it's fine and it's great and everything and you read it, but people wanted a little bit more. So they started to incorporate drawings. And originally they were just line drawings because you're limited as to what you can reproduce on a Gestetner or even on Mimeo. You know, so that's where it grew out of. And good fan art, you know, usually has a sense of humor. It's not trying to be photorealistic or anything like that. It's trying to get the artist's personality across. It's trying to make people laugh. It's trying to make people think. You know, it rarely is actually illustrating an article or you know, something specific.
But it can be. Like, this is an example of from Banana Wings recently. So, you know, letters edited by Mark. So it's just it's a badger.
Looks like a badger and a beanie with the magazine.
Right. So, you know, it's not complicated, but it's cute and it's fun and it's Spanish.
Right. I mean, you know, in the letter column for Argentus, I think it was Sue Mason created a drawing of an ionic column for me with the letters LOC at the top.
Right. I remember that.
You know, so it breaks it up. And, you know, but because it's Spanish and it's done. Joel, the problem is with your, you had it right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a Sue Mason.
Right. It's done for love. You know, you're doing it because you are a fan and you have something inside of you that you have to get out. Same reason why we publish fanzines in general. And so that's what we're honoring. We're honoring the people who are doing this stuff just for the love of doing it.
I think it does have a few kind of really unique particular types of items too, because like, as you say, a lot of the point of it is kind of to just visually break up the presentation of what's happening. So for instance, when I edited Mid-Fanzine, which was a con running zine for the somewhat short-lived group Mid-Fan, as I recall, I had Kurt Erickson do some illos for me that were really just dramatic presentations of the header of an article.
To me, the two distinctive fan artists were Bill Rossler in the US, whose stuff looked very simple, very humorous, but he did some amazing stuff. And similar was Arthur Thompson in Britain, who basically signed his stuff ATOM or Adam.
Yeah. And the fan art award, is it at Corfu, is named the Rotzler? Is that?
No. The Rotzler Award is given out at LOSCON.
At LOSCON, okay.
That's given out by NASFiC.
Oh, because that's where he was located, right?
Correct.
Right. Yeah. And back in the past, a lot of pro artists would send sketches and such to fanzines, to be published. And if I'm correct, in one year, didn't Jack Gaughan win both the best pro artist and best fan artist? Hugo?
Yeah, I think he was nominated in both categories. I don't think he won in both categories.
No. 1 year he did win. I think it was 1968, 1969.
Okay.
That actually happened.
Right. And I know that out in California, Marty Cantor, at least until relatively recently, still had fresh Rotzler art that hadn't been published. That if you reached out to Marty, he would send you an envelope full of original Rotzler art that you could use in your fanzine.
Cool.
I have
one of the nice things about Kurt Erickson and asking him for art for your fanzine, in addition to the fact that he does great work, is it gets you on his Christmas card list.
It does.
And every year, Kurt does a really funny, really wonderful Christmas card, and I believe that he just collected all of them into a book. So you can buy the book from Kurt and get all of these wonderful, humorous Christmas cards.
I think he also just recently collected, I forget the name of his gay comic that he wrote for many years. I think he also just collected that into a book.
I think you're right. So,
there were a lot of great fan artists from that era. I remember Tim Kirk. I think didn't he win a Hugo or two as a fan artist?
I think so.
Mm.
So, I mean, on the other hand, one of the things we're seeing now is the Fan Artist Award, the Hugo Fan Artist Award, is going well beyond illustration. It started out for a lot of people doing these simple line drawings, went to people who are doing more paintings and full color work, and now we're having a lot of people who are being nominated for three-dimensional work.
Sarah Felix.
Sarah, Spring Schoenherth. There are a lot of them. And I think that's great. It just shows how vibrant the community is. That we can look at art and think, okay, this all is worthwhile. This all is worthy, and we're not just trapped to the two dimensions anymore.
I'm hoping, I've been studying caricature for the last year, and I've been face painting freelance. And as we were stuck in quarantine, it occurred to me that I could combine the two. That I can do a caricature of somebody and then paint their face. So, and then I can also very easily change the overall outline of the face to give them elf ears or something like that.
So who's your model? Is it Rose or is it Brian?
Rosie. Well, when I'm face painting, I practice my face painting on Rosie. So if you look at my Flickr account, which is still AKG Murphy, but there's a bunch of pictures of Rosie and then also other kids that I've painted their faces. But when I'm trying something complicated for the first time, it's Rosie. As far as Rosie actually wants me to draw caricatures of her, but so far I've mainly been practicing them based on a photo, because then, you don't have to worry about somebody moving and changing their expression and stuff.
Or paying them.
What? Or paying them. Yeah, but
that's coming,
Yeah. But I've been studying from a guy who runs a channel on YouTube called Rouser World, and he runs like a workshop every Saturday morning, and where you can chat with him and practice, and he leads the practice and everybody just follows and along, and then he does a lot of like celebrities, or if you want, you can give him a picture for him to do. And he does a lot of exploration of different techniques. But I have done some from people. Actually, the first time I decided to try it in person, it was because I was substitute teaching for a Spanish class. And I speak Spanish, so that went actually really well. It was a high school Spanish class. And at one point, all of the students were either working on their assignments or done working on their assignments and just sitting around tables chatting. And there was this one table of girls, and I had just learned how to do like a poofy African American hair, you know, like a poof with a big dark marker. And there was a really, not necessarily like glamorous, pretty, but attractive girl who just had this, you know, friendly face that was sitting there in the group. And I was like, hey, you know, I'm learning how to caricature. Can I do your caricature? And she was like, sure. And all of a sudden, like all three of them were really into it. And I was like, this is unexpected. And so I did it. It was fun because there were things like she had earbuds in her ears. And so to space it right, I drew the lines for the earbuds first. And she was like, I look like I have a beard. And she like, you know, like, and then when I actually put in her jawline and then added the color into her hair, it just totally transformed the picture. So then she could see that it was her. And they were all like, ooh, you know, and then let me see. And she was like, don't touch my twin. And I was like, okay, she really likes it. It was really rewarding. And then I went to give it to her and the other girls were like, well, you have to sign it. So like, I was like, all right, I'm apparently an artiste now. And so I signed it and gave it to her. And then my boss was disappointed because she was like, so did you take a picture of it? I was like, no, I did not.
That's part of the learning curve.
Yeah. So,
I'm curious, how old were the girls?
well, they're high school, so probably 15.
Cool.
I think we're getting a little off topic here.
Yeah.
So, actually, Jeff Beeler asked a couple of questions. His first one was, what part did original fiction play in the development of fanzines?
My answer to that is very little. There was a lot of commentary on fiction. Some fanzines did run fiction, but I would say they were in the minority and not the best known ones.
That's not necessarily true. A few years ago, I did two collections of Lester Del Rey's short fiction for NASFiC Press.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, when I was reading everything that Lester had published, he mentioned in the early Del Rey that there was one short story that he published in a fanzine, but he couldn't remember the fanzine. He didn't have a copy of the story, so it wasn't going to be included in this book. And of course, I viewed that as a challenge. And I managed to figure out what fanzine it was published in. I managed to track down a copy. I actually thought the story was pretty good. And so it made the cut and, you know, for the first time ever was reprinted and in a book in one of the 2 volumes that I did for NASFiC Press.
Bravo.
So there was some fiction being published, but yes, it was a minority. Most of it was commentary.
Roger Zelazny had a couple stories in Outworlds, and he also had one in the RiverCon program book the year he was guest of honor. But and then there was Cosmos, and I forget which fanzine Cosmos originally ran, and this was back in the 30s, and it was a round robin serial by some of the, Doc Smith, Ross Rockland, some of the big name authors of the day. And this was published in a fanzine. So, you know, there were exceptions to the rule, but mostly back then people were trying to sell stories for a penny a word to the pulps. And
right.
If they couldn't get...
When I first started reading fanzines, I do remember having at least one that I picked up where I found myself confused because I couldn't tell if a story was fiction or real until like somewhere really far on in the story.
Yeah. Well, there is a lot of fictional, especially in the 60s to 80s, there were a lot of fictional stories about fans.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And semi-fictional. And I forget, I believe it was written by Ginger Buchanan, and Grant Falloon wrote the most hilarious convention report I've ever read called "I have had no sleep and I must giggle."
Although, Joel, I've got to say that hearing you say that, you know, fiction and fanzines was so minor is rather ironic given your background. you're sitting in front of the cover to The Enchanted
No,
Duplicator.
that's true.
The most famous piece of Spanish fiction ever written.
Probably.
I heard about a very fascinating story when I first got into fandom. It involved Piers Anthony and another author. I think it was Dean Koontz, who got into some sort of flame war. Does anybody know anything about that?
Oh, yeah, that was, well, actually, it was in two fanzines. It was mostly in Outworlds, which was edited by Bill Bowers, with the 71st issue coming out real soon now, 20 years after Bill died. But yeah, the funny thing is Dean Koontz and Anthony got into this big fight mostly in the letter column of Outworlds. Exactly. And now apparently Koontz is denying that any of the letters were actually written by him.
Oh.
So now I do want to mention two specific fanzines that you can buy the complete runs of in hardcover from NASFiC Press. One of them is Warhoon, and the other one is Pitfix.
Yeah. Well, it's not the complete run of Warhoon. It's Warhoon 28, which is the complete Walt Willis and fanzine.
Right.
And it's an amazing book. Actually, both of them are.
Yeah. So Warhoon 28, as Joel corrected me, is about yay thick. I have a copy of it in the other room. I'm not going to run over and get it right now. Yeah. And it is a wonderful reproduction. And it, Joel has mentioned Walt Willis multiple times. The first guy to come over for a proto fan fund. He was an Irish fan, and just a very good writer. And then Pitfix was essentially a fanzine for professional authors that I think was Theodore Cogswell put together. And they really get into it. There are some nasty things going on in there, but also some very funny things going on in there. Yeah. And the Pitfix books is also about that big. So.
Well, and one thing I wanted to mention, I'm going to put a link to the NASFiC Press in the chat. But that's the Northeast Science Fiction. Is it
New England Science Fiction Association?
England Science.
And by the way, they also published those two books that I did of Lester Del Rey stuff. So while you're over there, you can buy those.
Yeah. But the conversation about fiction or not fiction reminded me of one of the, obviously people, either literature authors or fan authors have always long played with pseudonyms. But as I got involved in the diversification of SF, of course, we had the birth of the Carl Brandon Society. And that was a case where for a long time, I think it was at least two different editor authors were involved in sort of conspiring together to create this character, Carl Brandon, who was a Black fan in California and wrote non-fictional stories about going to club meetings and things in San Francisco. I mean, they were non-fictional in that the person who was writing the story actually went to said meeting. And so everything described in the story was true, but there wasn't actually a Black fan named Carl Brandon.
Right.
It was mostly done by Terry Carr.
Right, with an assist from Pete Graham.
Okay, yeah. So I thought that was a fascinating story. I can't remember. Do you guys remember what era that was? What years?
That started in the 1950s, the middle of the 50s. And I think I think it was at least 5 or 6 years before anybody twigged to what was going on. So.
Yeah, and there are several collections available of the Brandon writings.
Yeah, I've read a bunch of them. And, like they're not, a whole bunch of people were like, well, but this wasn't an author who wrote about race issues or whatever, because, but it was like, but this was an example of somebody saying, well, let's see if we can nudge people who might not otherwise have accepted participation into unthinkingly accepting participation because they've been reading stuff by this guy, and then at some point it's revealed that he's a Black guy and they already know him, you know, and just to basically nudge toward integration. In fact, there's been some speculation, I think, as to whether or not they had that intention in the first place or just decided to do it later.
Yeah, once I found out about the Carl Brandon mythos, it's something I would dearly like to delve into myself. I don't see it, just hearing the history of Carl Brandon, I don't see it as cultural appropriation. I think they were trying to it was some sort of cultural subversion going on there.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, it was at a time where people were coming to terms with the fact that there were women fans and women authors.
Right.
But overall, it was still a very Caucasian, you know, or group, you know, very Caucasian culture.
Mm-hmm.
Although there is an argument that the first fanish meeting that ever took place was at the home of an African American who lived up on the I think the Upper West Side of New York.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on his name.
I'm drawing a blank too.
So
I remember that story, but I'm not even going to try to remember names. You guys know.
Yeah, when it comes,
you've had a long day.
To cultural issues, that's something I've tackled recently in some of the columns I've done for File 770. I did a special column on Juneteenth and a few other things before that. And I'm currently working on columns about what's happening now between last year and this year, leading up to the death of George Floyd. So it's.
I wish we could assume our whole audience knows what Juneteenth is, but they may not. So can you just explain for a second?
Juneteenth is a celebration of African Americans finding out for the first time. It was down in Galveston, Texas, in 1865, when a magistrate from the government came to one of the clearinghouses and said, the Emancipation Proclamation was 2 years old, and you guys are now free. And it turned into first it was a regional celebration, but I think within the last 25 years, it's really grown to a nationwide sort of celebration of the end of slavery in the United States.
Yeah, Pennsylvania actually, our governor declared it a state holiday, and I know a number of states have now.
But yeah, you're right. It's just in the recent years that it's grown outside of. I think it was pretty much focused on Texas and Oklahoma until not too long ago.
And Louisiana, I think.
That would make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just wanted to also mention that the Carl Brandon Society gives out awards to books. Is it books or authors?
They give out 2 awards. They give out the Parallax Award and the Kindred Award.
Right.
And I think that they go to specific books.
I think the one is like a recognition of something by an author of color, and then the other one is a recognition of something that in some distinguished way includes characters of color.
Okay, and Jeff Beeler points out that James Fitzgerald was the African American who hosted the first meeting up on the in New York.
Of Harlem.
So
if
it was Harlem, that would be, I was wrong. It was the Upper East Side.
Okay. So
actually, I do want to get back to the question about fiction again for a second, and that is because when a lot of people hear fan writer, a lot of people go immediately to, oh, so you write fan fiction.
Oh, yes.
But traditionally, the fan writer, as the Hugo acknowledges it, and I mean, the type of fan writer that I was getting my Hugo nominations for was not about writing fiction. It was about writing commentary, articles, you know, book reviews, things like that. Which is, you know, not to say that the other type of, you know, writing fan fiction doesn't make you a fan writer. It certainly does. It's just, it's a different route to go down, and it's not one that was frequently done in early fanzines, or even I think that's actually more of a recent thing. I know that there are fanzines out there that are dedicated to fanish fiction, not necessarily fanfic, writing in the universe of Star Trek, Star Wars, Twilight, whatever. But like Pablo Lenis, I believe, is a fanzine that really publishes fanish fiction, being fiction written by fans as opposed to about specific property.
It's definitely been the question of what constitutes a fanzine and what constitutes fan writing has had years when it's gotten a ton of debate. And then, of course, we've also seen a lot of debate, especially around the Hugo Awards, as people started to nominate things that were not even in print, websites and then podcasts.
Well, speaking as a current fan writer, it's the best time, I think, ever for if someone was interested in writing about issues regarding science fiction, fantasy, and horror, you could sit down at a laptop and self-publish commentary or reviews or criticism about the field, and I think that's great. It's so easy. My editor, Mike Glyer, I approached him about 3 years ago doing my column, and he welcomed me with open arms because he saw the need for this type of commentary, and he gave me the largest, I think, platform to actually express my views on. I'm eternally grateful that he's given me the chance to do this.
Yeah, I have to say, as a Wikipedia editor, File 770 has been an interesting sort of test case as far as us as Wikipedia editors and as people who know the field to have had to argue our case when we go to edit a Wikipedia article and say that our reference is File 770, and then other people would be like, well, that's not a journalistic reference, and we'd be like, it is in this field.
Yeah. What always got me is if I went into Wikipedia and I edited something, without a source, it would get bounced, as it should.
Yeah.
When I was doing SF Site News, if I went to SF Site News, wrote an article about it and posted it, and then went to Wikipedia and cited the article that I just wrote at SF Site News, I was golden.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, before we go, I do want to point out and following up on what Chris said, 2 places you can go to explore the world of fanzines. The first is efanzines.com.
Yes.
A wonderful endeavor from a man by the name of Bill Burns, which he collects current and some older fanzines, and you can read them online.
And he's open to getting more older fanzines. You just have to.
Yes.
And by coincidence, it's its anniversary today.
Okay. Is it?
Yeah, wedding anniversary.
And also, you can get most of the contemporary fanzines with the exception of Banana Wings, I think, which is still only available on paper.
Actually, you can request an electronic version of Banana Wings, but it has to be emailed directly to you.
Okay. Right. And the other site is fanac.org, which is doing a great job of collecting old fanzines and putting them online, scanning them.
Founded by Joe Ciclari, who is here with us this weekend, and then is also one of the fan.
Don't forget Edie Stern.
Don't forget Edie.
Yeah.
Don't forget Edie. Yes, sorry. Joe and his wife, Edie Stern, are both.
And also Mark Olson.
Yeah, but I was going to say
never heard of him.
Well,
who?
Joe and Edie founded it. And,
Joe and Edie founded it, and they're going to be fan guests of honor in is it next year?
SciCon 2022.
Yeah.
And then also another resource that we just posted a link to in the Discord is Fancyclopedia, which, like Wikipedia, is edited by anybody. Mark Olson has a huge hand in that. A lot of other people do also. And that not only has articles about fanzines, it has articles about anything that ties into fanish culture. And you're encouraged to put in cute little stories, to really bring out the personality of the people or the events that you're writing about there.
Yeah, I think that's one of the wonderful things about fanzines is that they aren't necessarily just, oh, well, we're reviewing books by prose, or we're telling the story of this con that we went to. A lot of it is also little stories, little moments in time, or even long trip reports about fans and their lives and their moments when we just get together as fans, but not to go, necessarily be fanish, like at a fanish event, but to, go to the Grand Canyon together, or, something like that. So.
Right. And, there are also a lot of in-jokes that are carried through in fanzines. And there's a strong sense of history in fanzines. One of the issues of Argentus that I did, in addition to 14 annual editions, I did, I think, 4 or 5 special editions. And one of them, there was a fanzine called Zenith several years ago. And I decided to do an issue called From Argentus to Zenith, where I reprinted Zenith, and then I took the article titles from Zenith and I sent them out to various authors saying, here's a title, write an article for me based on that title. Or I would vaguely describe the artwork. Hey, I need a picture of 2 cats in a pyramid. And so when I reprinted it, the first half of it is Argentus, where all the same titles, but very different articles written by people. And then the second half was the original Zenith that inspired that issue of Argentus. And that's available on the Argentus website, along with all the other issues of Argentus. And I will have our chat moderate wrangler post that link also in the Discord.
Yeah. Chris, I think one of the interesting things about it is the process of potentially, have you ever played with that
you have 3 minutes, please wrap.
Yep. Inviting people to contribute. I mean, obviously fan editors are always looking for contributions, but that idea of saying, hey, here's a theme, and then looking around and being like, you would be awesome on this theme. Come play with it with me.
Well, I'm usually a lone wolf when it comes to file 770.
Okay.
However, any fan that I've come across at conventions, in fact, we had a safe space meeting for people of color in Dublin. And one of the first things I did was say, please read and comment on my column, and get interested in contributing to sites like File 770 yourselves.
Yeah, and as a fanish editor, one of the things that I loved was just reaching out to people and, asking everybody from, the 3 of you, of course, up to, I had Mike Resnick, Bob Eggleton, Michael Burstein, some major names writing for me in a fanish capacity. And it's amazing how willing people are to just, toss something your way if you ask, and asking is the key.
Yeah, that reminds me actually of these days, there's also blurred.com, the term blending black and nerd. That's a whole nother thing, is of people coming together at a platform that invites them to gain a wider audience.
Which reminds me, as soon as we get off here, I'm going to be emailing Aaron Underwood and seeing if that policing fanzine issue that
it's still open,
because I want in on that.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's still open. It's the next issue of Journey Planet, and since my issue was published, well, now an hour and 40 minutes ago,
brag.
Aaron's, I think, is the next one in line. So, and I know that Chris is currently a little bit preoccupied.
Yeah.
So you should have some time.
Yeah, I just saw the cover of that issue of Journey Planet on Facebook, and it's a nice cover.
So
I'm not sure who did it, but nice cover.
Thank you. The contents, I believe, are just as nice. So people wrote about some absolutely amazing places.
So last thoughts, fanzines, go.
Keep
They're
writing.
here to stay.
Yes.
They're
Electronic.
not what they were when I started, but that doesn't matter. They're still here.
Yes. Easier than
And go
ever.
ahead and pub your ish, right? Publish
Right.
publish your issue if you want to start a
Pub
new
your ish.
pub your ish.
So.
Awesome. Well, thanks you guys for joining on this panel and for all that you do promoting all these connections and the history, especially. Joel at first when I invited him to this panel was like, well, I'll just mostly have history to talk about. I was like, yeah, that's why I invited you. So so thank you so much, and to our audience out there, thanks for joining us, and have a great night.
Hey, thank you for the invitation.
And thank you, Anne.
Yep.
Thank you, Anne.
And if you can, we're going to switch over to the Discord.
Sounds good.